So, Ray, thanks for joining me today. And one of the things I'd love to do, just get a kickoff, is kind of briefly introduce yourself and Constellation. I certainly follow both you on Twitter as well as Constellation, certainly read your materials, et cetera. But why don't you give the audience just a kind of a view of yourself and Constellation Research?
Yeah, Constellation Research. We are a research and analyst advisory firm. We are based in Silicon Valley, and we tend to look at business teams and their impact on technology. We've been following a lot of trends for quite some time. And as you can imagine today, we're spending a lot of time talking about the post-pandemic landscape and taking a futurist view, as well as something that you can act on in the next 6 to 12 months.
That's great. You know, one of the things I have just recently read is kind of your post-pandemic playbook, and it talks about how companies can adapt and as the world kind of reopens, if you will, right? And we go back to the office. I don't like to say going back to work because we're working today from home, if you will. But one of these things is really going to be defining success, I think, is this notion of embracing digital transformation. And so what's your view in terms of how companies cultivate a culture and this notion about a transformational mindset to really adopt and accept this notion of digital transformation?
Yeah, we're living digital transformation. For a lot of folks that have been working from home, doing remote work, I mean, the quick change was really the fact that it was okay. It was okay. The hardest part, though, was the fact that everybody's working from home. It used to be just one or two people, one person, the other person may be going to a physical location for work. And this shift has actually transformed how we think about work and workspaces. And I think that's going to be one of the most important things that we look at. Now, the culture of digital transformation, you're right, Carl. I mean, we've completely jumped into it without fully understanding what we've embraced, but we see it moving to the cloud. We see types of new business models emerging because human contact is no longer possible. We also see some shifts in terms of where and how we work. It could be anywhere, anytime. And we're also taking some time to think about what mental health means, especially given the fact that we're on screens all the time. And sometimes we need some personal interaction. We need some time off. And I think that's actually changing the way we think about, work styles and teams.
Yeah, in fact, one of the things you mentioned, I think, is this interesting notion about how it just happened and it worked, right? And I find it sometimes interesting that many of the things we fought and pushed back on are keys to our survival today. And just how fast we've changed in a matter of days, if not weeks, to just accepting and adopting things that were barriers are now tailwinds for us, if you will.
No, you're completely right, Carl. I mean, there was a resistance to the cloud because of security. You've been in
Mm-hmm.
the space for, decades. You know exactly what the barriers were. Oh, it might be a performance issue. Oh, it might be, we're not sure if people are actually going to work. Oh, we're not sure if you can actually get work done the same way. And what we learned is probably about 70 to 80% of the work that we do can be done in a remote setting, can be done in using collaboration tools, technologies, and embracing a different spirit of digital transformation. Now, there are some things that still have to be done in person, and I think people are going to work through those and when that makes sense. But we're going to see a bunch of hybrid models emerge in terms of how we work from home and we work from remote locations.
Speaking of hybrid, this is a question I was going to ask a little bit later, but I'm going to bring it here forward, Ray, if you don't mind, is we're starting to have a conversation with our customers about this notion of hybrid work environment. What that really means is working from home versus when you return back to the office, and have a purpose for why you're going back to the office. So it's notion of it's not what you do, or not where you go, it's what you do is defined as work. Do you have a view on this notion of hybrid working?
Yeah, I think what we've learned is what purposeful work we're going to take. And that means when I go into the office, what does that mean? Is it a social visit? Are we trying to collaborate on an idea that we can't do in a remote environment? Are we in a free-form brainstorming session? Do we have to have that meeting because there's a certain fidelity that's required to build trust? That we know that's going to happen. There's a second element, which is really as we enter this world of the autonomous enterprise, we're asking ourselves four questions. The first question is, when do I trust human judgment? The second question is, when do I augment human judgment with a level of AI and automation? When do I trust, the third question is, when do I trust the machine and augment them with a human? And then when do we fully trust intelligent automation? And that goes hand in hand with some of the things that are going on as well, because what we're trying to do is some of the areas where we can automate, it's contactless, doesn't require human intervention. Those are the areas we're trying to get to a level of automation. And we're also doing it from a risk and compliance perspective as well to make sure that, you really don't want to incur a GDPR fine or a CCPA fine for something that you did by accident, if you can actually reduce that level of risk, right? But these new environments and when you actually going to work are all going to be dictated by those two parameters.
Let's talk about that. If I could drill down on that, because one of the things I often question is this. We're having less and fewer moments of what I call serendipity around innovation.
Yes.
And Ginny Rometty was just quoted last week, I think, in Wall Street Journal, says that they're envisioning the office as much more an innovation hub. And you'll go to the office with a purpose. So the question is what's your thoughts in terms of when we get back that workspace that's safe and conducive, will it be also just a brainstorming and collaboration space? What's your thoughts about that, just in terms of less moments of just gathering like we used to do informally and ad hoc?
Carl, that's a great point. We've been spending time trying to talk about why some virtual events aren't working, why some digital events don't work, why certain digital technologies aren't helping. It's because of not designing for serendipity. Now, that sounds oxymoronic when you first say, let's design for serendipity, but it's that casual conversation. It's that, comment in the hall. It's bumping into someone you normally don't have. We don't build those into the virtual interactions. And you're right, because when you go into the office, you aren't all focused on one channel. People aren't all waiting their turn to speak. And it's that dynamic, I think, that's helping us, get to that creativity, innovation, when we can actually all blurt out something or see something all at once. We're not able to do that right now. And I think we're in sensory deprivation. And that's why we need some of those in-person meetings. We need to build those innovation labs. We need to build those creative spaces. And when we do get together, it's really about being able to rebuild those connections and spur sparks of innovation.
It's one of those things I call them unplanned collisions, in the office, right? In terms of that's when a lot of times things come up and we really we're not replacing those today. But likewise, when we talk about these inspired moments, what's your thoughts on how we create those in a virtual setting? Because the virtual setting is not going away. And I would hate to tell us that we have to go to the office for innovation and these notions of kind of inspired moments. Have you seen or thought much about how we actually do that and encourage that in a virtual environment?
Yeah, we've actually given this a lot of thought, and we think part of the problem is because of the one-way nature of the conversation. You and I potentially having conversation right now, this is direct, this is fast, it's rapid fire, I can sense. But once we start adding more people into the conversation, we start to lose that. And when we get to larger meetings, the side conversations that we used to have don't occur. I can't jot something down on a piece of paper and say what's going on. Now, what we have done is we've used chat rooms and chats to be able to do that. But there's also that in-between time. And one of the ways you can help drive that is create a whole bunch of channels and rooms that are open, these sub rooms that open up that allow you to have different topics and conversation. One sub room might be, I'm so tired of bread, right? It could be funny, right? The other side room could be like, it'd be nice to be able to go somewhere, like people that are road warrior addicts. And you create these different topics so people actually jump in, scan in. It's almost like channel surfing. And you might see someone you haven't seen in a while and you jump in. And you have to create those types of moments. And that's what we talk about with this design for serendipity.
Just along those likewise, in your pandemic playbook, you kind of touch on this notion of, workers thrive in remote environment situations. But do you see different personas with different needs? You kind of touched on that a little bit there, trying to see if there's more there that we should really think about intentionally around personas and depending on that persona, what your needs are. And just think about that from an employer to an employee and those kind of things.
There are. Part of going to work is also the social interactions that occur at work and the social structure. And I think that's part of building trust, being part of a family, being part of a team. Those have to be recreated in the digital sense. You have a mentor that you might reach out to. You see someone casually in the office, you can kind of say hello. Well, right now, these are all forced direct type of interactions. There is no kind of, just drop in a line, right? Ping me when you see something. And you get that sometimes in chat, but it's not the same when you can actually come in and have that conversation. And so we're going to see a lot more of that design to make sure people are checking in with folks, are having those conversations, because there's an element of some individuals and personas, they are feeling lonely at work. And for other individuals, they don't know when to stop in terms of how much work they're doing. And for another set of individuals, they're not getting the mentorship that they used to get and those conversations. Other folks absorb in person much more than they do online. We see that already with online education and online learning. There is a limit to how much you can do that before you actually have to bring folks back together. Now, to give you an example, Constellation Research, we've been doing work from home for over a decade. And what we deliberately do is we design 3 to 4 interaction points where people do come together. We do have our own conferences. We do have our own internal retreats. And then we also see everybody on the road along the way at least once or twice a week, depending on what type of work that's being done. And that helped build a lot of the bonds, the friendships that are required. People have to remember that that level of human action still has to be designed. Doesn't mean no one goes to the office. It doesn't mean everyone goes to the office. And I think you want to give people that choice as well, because people might have at-risk conditions in their homes that they have to worry about, or they might be themselves be at risk. And we don't want people to feel like they're not part of something if you do open up the office.
I do see those personas, Ray, because maybe just with the style of being in sales. I've worked virtually now because I'm working in hotel rooms, airports, lounges at airports, wherever I can, coffee shops where I can grab a Wi-Fi connection in a quiet corner. That's what I do. But I have noticed since kind of COVID-19 inside Poly, we're a pretty virtual organization, but there are some people who are not used to doing that. And to me, I have to take a step back and kind of just understand they're not as comfortable doing it as our sales organization. We've got 1,000 people in the Poly sales organization. And that's just how they operate. And I haven't seen hardly any change in their behavior, but I have in terms of the non-sales, just from the persona perspective. Just an interesting idea.
There is. I mean, people are just starting to get used to having their face on a screen. They were able to do something, it just voice only. The environments aren't always quiet or ideal. Right? We've met everyone's kids. We've seen everyone's living areas. That's kind of changed the way we kind of view things. And so I think if you're used to having that office and having that desk and that quiet space to get some work, not everybody has extra room in their homes to be able to get some work done. And so that was probably a peaceful place where you didn't have to worry about home life. You could get your work done. You could concentrate. A lot of people have lost that, especially with kids running in the background when schools are closed, especially when, you've got other activities that are going on and, you're just trying to get groceries delivered and someone's at the door and you're in the middle of a meeting. I mean, it's basic things like that. We haven't been able to help people manage those things. So it's not just the fact that people are used to being in the office. It's also all the distractions we're also having from home.
Yeah. Speaking of that, just kind of a take on that, you kind of touched on this earlier. I want to come back to this. We focused a lot now. I have seen our customers, our partners, and even Poly ourselves working about when we return to the office, a lot about the physical health and safety of employees, social distancing, make sure we've got the cleanliness, make sure we're doing all the things we should to make sure people feel safe. But I don't know how much we're doing, or are we doing enough around the mental part of this, the mental side? And I know that's kind of in your writings as well. I've kind of seen that. Your thoughts in terms of just as a industry, as a kind of just a notion, are we doing enough around that, or are we not really giving it the time it deserves?
Carl, it's a great point. I have a master's in public health. When I think about the return to work, I take it from a public health point of view. A lot of it is really the fact that there is a mental health component, and that was the human interaction piece. We've seen telemedicine pick up as a benefit for a lot of workers, the ability to access mental health services. Mental health services and telemedicine and telehealth have gone up as people feeling lonely. They're feeling overwhelmed. If you were to watch the news, I mean, I'm a news junkie. I think you are too. I mean, I watch the news probably like 14 out of 24 hours. There's a lot going on. And, it could really unnerve you if you're not used to that level of information and the type of information that's being presented, especially given the fact you have to sift through multiple channels to understand what the news is really about. So all that is driving people a little crazy. And the fact that you don't have, it doesn't feel normal. Right? It just doesn't feel normal. The ability to go out to grab something to eat, the ability to go see someone, the ability to drive. A lot of people feel like their freedom has been impinged on.
Yeah. Question in terms of, if we kind of step back and change a little bit, I'd like to ask a couple questions in terms of the extent you've talked to customers in this marketplace. Just curious in terms of 2 points. One is, should we adapt in terms of trying to interact with customers and prospects in this environment? Here's what I find personally is, for customers I have relationships with, or we've got projects already going, it's fairly easy to continue that and extend. But for new ones, because, once again, I go back to these unintentional collisions. When I would go see a customer in New York and I have this meeting, on the way there, I'm seeing 2 or 3 people that I'd like to introduce or I've met before or whatever. And you just constantly do that. On video, you don't do that. So do you have a view in terms of how our interactions may be different with customers and prospects going forward?
Carl, we've been thinking about this for at least the last 3 months. How do we recreate those types of collisions, these random collisions? A good friend of mine, Saul Kaplan at the Business Innovation Factory, calls them ruckus, these random collisions that actually occur.
Yes.
And it's so important to create those. And actually, we're thinking about how to do that. In fact, we actually believe there's a way to actually create customer and prospect events a little bit more intimate, 20 to 30 people. You actually bring a friend, and that way there's some level of familiarity.
Mm-hmm.
And what you do is you do something. You take cheese or wine or coffee or tea, right? And you create a tasting session, right? And you bring people in, you share a little bit of some information. It's a way to gather. It's kind of like the way people do these virtual wine sessions where people are getting together. Yeah. But here you bring a sommelier, you bring a cheesemaker, you bring a master craftsman, and they come and share with you some of that along the way. So you have a great conversation, you get to meet everybody in a smaller group, share some information, and then you jump into an activity. We're going to have to recreate these types of digital activities along the way. And we have to get better at, being able to meet new people. Like you, Carl, I mean, I'm a road warrior. I used to be on planes 300,000-400,000 miles a year. And, you bump into the same group of people at an airport, right? You see people in the lounge. I mean, you see people on the way to a venue. I mean, that's all gone, right? And
that's right.
To be able to recreate that, I think is going to be very important, especially for sanity's sakes and also for building relationships.
Good question. How about your thoughts in terms of have you done any work or thinking around different industries that are leaning forward and probably in all the things we've talked about return to the office and what they're doing, and because are you seeing industries that are kind of leaning forward into something around this line, and or are you seeing industries that may be disrupted more than others because they're not? And I always find in terms of these major changes like this is when the disruption happens. This is when Uber and Airbnb are invented. This is when these kind of things happen, right? And I don't know what the backside of it is, but somebody's going to be disrupted during this time frame. I'm trying to figure out what is. I have my own impression who I think a couple are, but would love your take on that.
No, you're definitely in luck. We just wrote a post this morning really talking about density and density business models. If your business model is built on density, it's dead. It's over. You're going to have to rethink it. And what do I mean by density? Think about retail. It's about revenue per square feet, right? Think about live events. It's really about packing as many people in a place. Airlines are in the same boat. Transit's in the same boat. How many people can we actually get together? Those density models are dead. What we have to rethink about are digital monetization models. And these are digital goods, digital services, memberships, subscriptions, even advertising. Mm-hmm. Those are the 5 big models. And so the question we always tell people to think about, and I'm actually in the middle of writing a book about this, is really the fact that how do you think like a digital giant? What are they doing? How are they building those models? What's important? And so you want to take where you have the biggest reach, which is your membership base, your customer base, and figure out what you can do to provide a digital monetization model that's going to help you get out of it. So if you're a restaurant today and you're not able to get the same volume in-room dining, then maybe you start becoming a different model where you have a digital service. The chef comes out and you subscribe to a program where once a month you learn how to make an interesting dish. They'll deliver it to you. You can also learn how to make it. You can also help them procure the ingredients and actually go cook that yourself in your own place and share that with someone else. That's going to be one of those models. Another model may be a membership, right, to that service to be able to go do that. And then you're going to pick up advertisers who want to be part of it. We're seeing a lot of folks and a lot of companies get into a term that John Hagel coined about 20 years ago, infomediaries. We're all infomediaries. We're turning into our own marketing, our own brands are actually being out there, and we're a channel, and companies have to start thinking like that. And so I use restaurants as an example. You see that in retail. You're going to see that in other fields. Now, for the fields where you don't need physical presence and you don't need density, those companies are still going to do well. And we've seen that already in the run-up in big tech stocks. You can see that, right? These are companies that have built digital business models and can survive. Now, they're not uniquely one or the other in the sense that they're not mutually exclusive. You will have digital business models interact with physical models. It's just the companies that are heavily exposed to physical and density. Those are the ones that have to build the digital channels.
Got it. Another question I'd love to take off on that one is just your perspective on education, and particularly higher education, because I think K-12, it's pretty, we know what's going to happen there, I think, in terms of they're going to do some virtual stuff there. But I'm starting to hear lots of friends. Luckily, my kids are out of college, so I'm not worried about this today. But I have these people who their kids are going to the great universities, and they're asking, am I really going to pay $50,000 for my kid to work virtually? And I don't think so. There's a model I think it's going to be highly disrupted. Unfortunately, I think that's because I say unfortunately because I think they need that social setting, and they haven't figured this one out yet. It's just your thoughts just overall on education.
It's a great question in the higher education market. I think one of the things that we've seen is already a dichotomy between brand name schools and places that actually give you real skills for life. And what I'm saying by the brand name schools, that's really about an experience. That's really about building networking.
Mm-hmm.
That's really about getting the education and a chance to think and the luxury of the chance to think. And then what we have is a set of other skills that actually are designed for you to be successful at work or to get you into a trade. And we already see that on the extreme end where you go to trades, you learn a skill, you become an electrician, you become a plumber, right? But we're also going to see that as you become a computer engineer, you become a graphic designer, you become a speech coach. And we're starting to see a lot of this competency-based education emerge. You see it in a Western Governors University, you see it at University of Phoenix, you see it a whole bunch. I think Southern New Hampshire is another great example,
Right.
one of those. And what you have is the situation where you're learning skills for life, skills for a job and a career, and it's lifelong. Right. One of the Harvard chancellors, the guy that actually started the continuous education, he said, look, it's a 100-year curriculum. You are in the middle of a 100-year curriculum. You're doing lifelong learning and different skills are going to come along the way. So you'll have these brand name schools, let's say the top 50, top 100 schools in the US. They're going to play a role in terms of creating that experience and that time for you to grow. And then you're going to have a whole bunch of other learning opportunities that are going to evolve along the way that used to be known as continual education, but it's actually more than that. Look, I'm trying to figure out how to get a website on, trying to figure out how to get onto Swift. Where am I going? I'm going to one of those learning sites, right? I'm not going to university for that. If I want to figure out how to pick up a course on, online finance and accounting, yeah, I might drop into any one of the schools that actually offers that capability, or go to my community college and learn a lot more and a lot more quickly. So we're going to see that dichotomy, and you're completely right. Higher education is about to take a big hit. And then, of course, if you've got kids that are oriented in sports, right? If you can't play sports and you can't get into schools or play, at that level, given what's happening on the health side, that's also going to have a big impact.
Yeah. Two more questions if I could. One is, if you go back to, it wasn't that long ago, maybe it's because a certain company did some branding and marketing very smartly. They talked about the third space. We had the office, we had the home, and we had the third space, which we knew was typically a coffee shop that had coffee and other kind of things there, right? Is that still alive? Is there going to be a new third space, or is that third space really not there anymore?
I think the third space is what you create. It's going to be whatever you need to actually get work done, bring people together. I think the original concept still makes a lot of sense, but I think what's going to happen is going to evolve. It might even be an augmented reality room or virtual room where you're actually sitting there, right? I mean, that's going to change that space. And I think it's, I think that's important. There may be a fourth space. I mean, I've done enough podcasts and interviews from my car because I had nowhere quiet, I stick the microphone up and we're good to go, right? You get one of these headsets, you can go anywhere. So
there you go. Absolutely. Right. So, Ray, you've been generous with your time. We've covered a lot of ground. One last thing I always like to ask guests when I talk to them about it, tell me something I don't know or the audience don't know that we should know.
I think we got a very smart audience. I'm going to give it a shot here. I think one of the big things that's happening is these new digital business models are built on 5 important concepts. And I think the first one is massive membership models are important. The second piece is the fact that they're multi-sided networks. You got a buy side, a demand side. You might have another side that's in place. And then the third piece that's important is these exponential technologies where we're seeing cloud and video technologies and AI and big data and edge computing. They're all coming together, quantum. They're going to play a role in terms of creating new business models, but they're all built on what we call signal intelligence and decision velocity. It's about helping people make quicker decisions, helping systems automate those decisions. And then the last piece is companies with a long-term mindset are the ones that are going to do well, because we're not planning for the next quarter. Those organizations are planning for the next decade. And that's the big difference that we're seeing.
Ray, I appreciate your time, and I would encourage anybody that reads the blog that we're going to put out or have to see a snippet of this video to really take a look at kind of Constellation's website and the research, as well as follow you on Twitter, which I do. There's always some very good nuggets there, and I would encourage them to do that because you guys are leaning in pretty heavily, and I don't think you're a traditional analyst firm when it comes to that. So I would encourage people to take a look at that. Appreciate your time, and I'm sure we'll see each other at a show or trade show or a research event soon.
Thank you.